The room was heavy with anticipation, a charged silence that pressed against every wall, every eye fixed on the stage where the confrontation was about to erupt. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and the hum of tension was almost audible. At the center, Stephen Miller stood, his posture rigid, his stare sharp and predatory, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett remained calm, an unshakable anchor amid the storm, her eyes steady, her shoulders squared. Then he spoke. The words cut through the quiet like a jagged blade, sharp, deliberate, intended to intimidate. A sneer edged his voice as he launched his verbal assault, aiming to humiliate her in front of the nation. Every syllable was meant to land like a punch, to make her flinch, to break the composure she had so carefully cultivated. But the effect was not what he expected. Instead of faltering, Crockett's calm presence seemed to absorb the impact, each word bouncing off her with no mark left. Her steady gaze did not waver. Her lips curved slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the absurdity in his attack. The room itself seemed to notice, shifting, leaning in. Whispers rippled through the audience. Something was happening that no one could quite name yet, a subtle reversal of power, almost imperceptible at first, but impossible to ignore. Miller's confidence, so carefully rehearsed, began to crack under the weight of her quiet strength. His gestures grew sharper, his tone more desperate. And yet, with every attempt to dominate, he only drew more attention to his own arrogance. Meanwhile, Crockett's demeanor radiated composure and dignity, a stark contrast to his escalating frustration. The energy in the room shifted, the audience drawn magnetically toward her poise, toward the silent power of her presence. In that suspended moment, time seemed to slow. Cameras captured every nuance, the tightening of his jaw, the ease of her posture, the unspoken understanding that she would not be shaken. The first whispers of disbelief began to ripple across the crowd, a collective recognition that the script had been flipped. But no one in that room expected what Jasmine would do next.
The tension in the room was only the beginning. Outside, the story had already taken on a life of its own. News alerts pinged across phones, banners scrolled across cable networks, and social media feeds exploded with speculation. Hashtag Crockett versus Miller was trending before the debate had even started. A digital drumbeat announcing to the world that something historic was about to unfold. Journalists huddled in corners, typing furiously, capturing every nuance, every fleeting glance, every pause, as if the fate of the nation hung on the outcome of this single exchange. Inside, the stakes were unmistakable. This was not just a debate. It was a collision of ideals, a confrontation between arrogance and dignity, between fear-mongering and courage. Miller, with his reputation for intimidation and his history of sharp, divisive rhetoric, represented the entrenched machinery of power, unyielding, confident, and dangerous. Crockett embodied a different kind of power, integrity, composure, and an unwavering commitment to her community. Her calm demeanor was not weakness, it was a statement, a deliberate challenge to a system built on aggression and fear. Staffers moved nervously along the edges of the room, whispering updates, adjusting microphones, and checking monitors. Their anxiety was contagious, infecting the audience, the camera crews, even the politicians who had gathered to watch. Every gesture, every glance was magnified under the unforgiving scrutiny of the media, where a single misstep could define a career, a reputation, or a movement. The crowd itself was a microcosm of the nation's divisions. Some watched with anticipation, silently rooting for Crockett's victory, drawn to her poised defiance. Others shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure what to make of the collision of personalities and principles unfolding before them. The energy was electric, a living tension that threaded through every heartbeat in the room. Every whisper, every murmur, every click of a camera shutter added to the gravity of the moment. This confrontation was bigger than politics. It was about identity, values, and belonging. For those who had felt marginalized, silenced, or dismissed, Crockett represented a beacon of possibility, a figure who refused to be intimidated, who stood firm not only for herself, but for a broader vision of fairness and justice. For others, Miller represented the old guard, a reminder that power could be wielded as a weapon and that the struggle for dignity was ongoing and never guaranteed. The cameras rolled relentlessly, capturing every flicker of emotion, every tightened jaw, every hint of hesitation. The debate was already spilling into living rooms, into social media threads, into late-night commentary. People were watching, sharing, reacting, and debating. Every second carried weight, every word carried consequence, and the nation felt as if it were holding its collective breath, waiting for the first crack in the facade to appear. And as the cameras kept rolling, the tension began to boil over.
Stephen Miller's name had long carried weight in the corridors of power, whispered in strategy meetings and shouted across partisan platforms. To his allies, he was a master tactician, a sharp mind who wielded words like weapons. To his opponents, he was relentless, unyielding, a force that seemed almost impervious to reason or empathy. His reputation was built on intimidation, carefully calculated attacks designed to unsettle, to dominate the narrative, to ensure that the opposition flinched before the first sentence was even delivered. He thrived in arenas where tension ran high, where the stakes were visceral and the cameras never blinked. Whether in committee hearings or public debates, Miller had perfected the art of psychological pressure. His voice was precise, his timing deliberate. A pause, a pointed question, a condescending smile, each gesture a tool to destabilize anyone who dared challenge him. The man had become a living embodiment of confrontation, a figure who seemed to feed off the discomfort of others, a predator in the suit and tie of political theater. Flashbacks of his previous victories played across the collective memory of the political landscape. There was the town hall where he cornered an inexperienced opponent, reducing hours of policy discussion to a string of humiliating soundbites. There were the hearings where his rhetoric cut through testimony like a scalpel, exposing contradictions and eliciting public applause for his cunning. These moments had cemented his aura of invincibility, the sense that Miller could bend any encounter to his will, and that defeat was not in his vocabulary. But those past triumphs, impressive as they were, relied on a pattern, an over-reliance on fear, on aggression, on the assumption that the opponent could be rattled. His overconfidence had become a second skin, his armor reinforced by a long history of predictable dominance. Every smirk, every well-aimed barb, every rehearsed counter-argument was part of a formula that had worked time and time again. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The same tactics that had once been unstoppable had grown brittle, susceptible to exposure by an opponent who refused to play by the expected rules. Miller's confidence, a double-edged sword, now carried the risk of miscalculation. The world had changed. The audience had changed. Social media amplified every misstep. History magnified every contradiction, and the public's appetite for authenticity had grown sharper. The same aggression that once commanded respect now risked alienation, and the very arrogance that had fueled his rise now hinted at an impending fall. Even in that charged room, one could sense the beginning of his unraveling. The calculated glare, the rehearsed insults, the practiced posturing, they were still there, but beneath them lingered a subtle unease, a whisper of doubt. The energy in the air shifted ever so slightly as the audience began to notice not just his power, but the patterns that had always accompanied it. Miller's armor, polished and imposing for years, was showing faint scratches that only the perceptive could see. And yet he remained confident, convinced that his previous dominance would carry him through. He adjusted his tie, squared his shoulders, and launched into another sharp remark, expecting the familiar flinch, the predictable falter. The audience braced themselves for another display of fear and submission. But this time, Miller's usual tactics would meet an unshakable opponent.
Jasmine Crockett's journey was forged in the quiet moments that rarely made headlines. The long nights spent poring over law books while her peers were out celebrating. The early mornings knocking on doors in communities too often overlooked. The countless hours volunteering for causes that had no immediate reward but carried immeasurable impact. Her story was not one of sudden brilliance or overnight fame. It was a testament to resilience, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Born and raised in a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce but ambition burned bright, Crockett learned early that dignity was not given, it was earned. Her parents instilled in her a sense of responsibility, a belief that she had a duty to lift others even as she climbed. She saw firsthand the struggles of families whose voices were ignored, of children whose potential was stifled by systemic barriers, and of neighbors who faced injustice silently, hoping someone would act. These early experiences shaped her, molding a sense of purpose that would carry her far beyond the narrow confines of her own ambitions. In law school, Crockett's reputation for discipline and perseverance became apparent. While many were satisfied with mediocrity, she sought mastery, often staying up through the night to draft arguments, dissect legal precedents, and prepare for moot courts. She understood that knowledge was power, but so was empathy, the ability to listen, to understand, to translate complex systems into real-world change for real people. Her professors and peers quickly recognized that she possessed a rare combination: razor-sharp intellect coupled with a heart attuned to justice. But her work did not stop at the classroom. Crockett threw herself into her community, providing pro bono legal services to immigrants navigating a system stacked against them, advocating for workers fighting for fair wages, and mentoring young people who had been told their voices didn't matter. She became a quiet force, someone whose presence alone inspired others to act, to believe, to hope. Her life was a series of small victories that accumulated into a powerful legacy of trust and respect. What set Crockett apart, beyond her achievements, was her composure under pressure. In political arenas, in heated discussions, in moments when others might panic or lash out, she remained calm. This was not passive calm, it was active strength. She had learned that fury and aggression were easily noticed, but that patience, clarity, and unwavering focus often carried far more weight. Opponents would try to rattle her, to provoke a reaction that would make headlines. But time and again, she had demonstrated that her calm was not weakness, it was armor. Her reputation for steadiness was built through countless real-world tests, navigating contentious board meetings, advocating for policy changes in hostile environments, confronting systemic obstacles in courtrooms, and standing firm against powerful adversaries who underestimated her because of her youth, her background, or her unwavering morality. Each challenge honed her, sharpening both her intellect and her resolve. She had learned how to anticipate attacks, how to respond with precision, and how to turn moments of potential weakness into displays of quiet, undeniable strength. In addition to her professional rigor, Crockett's story resonated with countless Americans because it was rooted in identity and empathy. She represented communities often silenced or ignored, embodying the values of inclusion, fairness, and dignity. Her life was a bridge between aspiration and action, a living example of how one individual's steadfastness could ripple outward to empower entire neighborhoods, cities, and movements. Her work was not for recognition, it was for transformation, a commitment that earned her the admiration and loyalty of those who witnessed her journey. All of this had prepared her for the moment that now loomed. Every late night, every case, every speech, every act of quiet courage had built a foundation strong enough to withstand public scrutiny, verbal attacks, and political theater. She did not enter the confrontation untested. She entered armed with experience, with purpose, and with an unshakable belief in the righteousness of her position. And so, when Miller's words came at her like arrows, she already had the armor.
The air in the room thickened with tension, a palpable current that seemed to crackle with every word exchanged. Stephen Miller leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, voice sharpening with every sentence. He gestured with dismissive hand waves, each motion punctuating his argument like a whip, designed to assert dominance and command attention. The crowd stiffened, sensing the familiar pattern, the verbal onslaught, the intimidation, the expectation that his opponent would crumble under the weight of his aggression. Crockett, by contrast, remained unflinching. Her posture was calm, shoulders squared, voice steady yet commanding. She did not rush, did not falter, did not give him the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. Every word was deliberate, measured, and delivered with clarity. She met his aggression not with anger, but with reason, not with retaliation, but with precision. The contrast between them was stark. Miller's rising fury against her composed authority, his brashness against her measured clarity. Audience members leaned in, unable to tear their eyes away. Some gasped at Miller's intensity, others murmured approval at Crockett's poise. Phones were raised, cameras whirred, recording every word, every shift in expression. The energy in the room oscillated between suspense and disbelief, a collective anticipation that made each statement feel heavier, more consequential. Whispered reactions spread across the crowd, subtle but significant, as if the audience itself were actively participating in the debate. Miller, sensing the shift in energy, pushed harder. His tone grew sharper, laced with condescension, each statement carefully engineered to provoke a crack in her composure. "Are you really prepared to handle the realities of leadership?" he asked, voice tight with expectation. A few in the audience nodded, ready to see her falter. He believed the pattern would repeat: intimidate, dominate, and control. Crockett did not falter. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle before responding. Her words were calm, clear, and cutting in their precision, exposing the contradictions in his assertions without raising her voice. She reframed his attacks, shifting the focus from personal confrontation to principles, from intimidation to accountability. Every rebuttal landed like a pebble in a storm, subtle at first, then building into a wave of recognition among the spectators. The tension grew, almost unbearable. Eyes darted from one figure to the other, breaths held, murmurs rising. The room was a living entity, responding to the clash of confidence and composure, to the collision of aggression and grace. Each line Crockett delivered chipped away at the veneer of Miller's certainty, and with each moment, the audience began to sense the reversal, the predator encountering a force he could not easily bend. Staffers shifted nervously at the edges, knowing that the dynamics had changed. Reporters leaned closer, anticipating a pivotal moment, their fingers poised over keyboards and record buttons. The debate was no longer merely an exchange of ideas. It had become a battlefield of character, a display of courage versus intimidation, and the audience was fully conscious of the shift. Then, as the room hung on a single breath, the tension broke, just enough to hint at what was coming next. Every gaze was fixed, every whisper amplified, every heartbeat synchronized with the drama unfolding on stage. Then came the moment that turned the entire room upside down.
The room held its breath. Every eye was fixed on Crockett, whose calm demeanor had already begun to tilt the scales of power in her favor. Miller, sensing the first fractures in his armor, leaned in once more, his voice sharp, his hand gestures aggressive, as if the physical display could somehow reclaim the momentum slipping from him. The audience felt the tension tighten around them, a collective pulse of anticipation that made each second stretch infinitely. Crockett inhaled slowly, letting the charged silence fill the room. Then she spoke. Her voice was steady, clear, and authoritative, cutting through the tension like a beam of light piercing a stormy sky. She began not with anger, but with facts, well-documented points, anecdotes drawn from lived experience, examples of policies and actions that exposed the flaws in Miller's assertions. Every line was deliberate, measured, designed to illuminate truth while avoiding personal attacks. Yet in the precision of her argument there was power. In the calm there was undeniable authority. Miller shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He tried to interrupt, to inject his usual bluster, but Crockett anticipated the attempt. She paused just long enough, a pregnant silence that allowed her next point to hit with full weight. The audience felt it instinctively. The moment of truth had arrived, the pivot where intimidation met unshakable resolve. Whispers ran through the room, subtle but telling, a recognition that the dynamic had changed. The predator was now being observed, measured, and contained. She unfolded her argument like a narrative carefully constructed for maximum impact. Statistics, real-life examples, and personal anecdotes were woven together seamlessly. She highlighted the human cost of policies, the communities affected, the promises broken by arrogance and self-interest. Her words painted vivid images, compelling the audience to see not abstract issues, but real people whose lives had been shaped by decisions made in corridors of power. Every revelation landed like a strike, subtle at first, then building into an unmistakable crescendo of clarity and moral authority. Miller's confidence began to crumble visibly. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted, and a subtle tremor in his voice betrayed the strain of watching someone dismantle his carefully constructed narrative with elegance and precision. Each rebuttal Crockett delivered landed like a scalpel, precise and cutting, leaving the crowd to absorb the shift in momentum. Even those who had initially leaned toward him found themselves leaning back, caught off guard by the clarity and courage of her delivery. The room's energy transformed. Gasps punctuated particularly powerful points. Hands rose for applause, hesitant at first, then growing in volume and confidence as the weight of her argument sank in. Some muttered under their breath. Others exchanged glances of admiration, the silent acknowledgement that a display of genuine strength was unfolding before them. The cameras captured every moment, the raised eyebrows, the subtle nods, the slight slumps in Miller's posture, as though the cameras themselves recognized the magnitude of what was happening. Crockett's pacing was deliberate. She allowed each point to resonate, giving space for the audience to process the implications. Pauses were strategic, moments of silence loaded with significance, allowing the tension to build before the next revelation hit. When she referenced concrete evidence, receipts that contradicted Miller's past statements, or moments where public accountability had failed, the audience responded instinctively. The room seemed to lean in collectively, as if every person there were absorbing a truth that could not be ignored. And then came the line that changed everything. With a measured pause, she fixed her gaze at Miller and the audience, her voice unwavering, a statement so powerful in its simplicity that it landed with cinematic finality. The words cut through the tension like a lightning strike, exposing arrogance, demanding accountability, and asserting authority. The effect was immediate. Murmurs cascaded through the room. Applause erupted, some hesitant, some spontaneous, some thunderous, while others simply sat in stunned silence, recognizing the gravity of the moment. Miller's attempts to regain control faltered. His hand gestures became sharper, almost frantic. His voice rose, but it no longer carried the same power. The room's focus had shifted irreversibly. Crockett had turned the confrontation into a display of unassailable authority. Her calm, measured, and righteous approach overpowered the theatrics and intimidation he relied upon. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves caught up in the momentum of her reasoning, moved not by rhetoric alone, but by a combination of clarity, courage, and undeniable moral weight. The audience's reaction intensified. Whispers became exclamations, nods became standing ovations, and the room itself seemed to pulse with recognition of what had just occurred. Crockett had executed the perfect counterattack, a blend of intellect, composure, and emotional resonance that dismantled the opposition while elevating her own credibility and stature. It was not just a rebuttal, it was a statement, a declaration that intimidation could be met with dignity, that arrogance could be confronted with truth, and that composure could be more powerful than aggression. In that suspended moment, the room held its collective breath. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, the tightness in Miller's jaw, the calm assurance in Crockett's expression, the crowd's astonished and appreciative reaction. The shift in power was palpable, unmistakable, and irreversible. The predator had been confronted not with fury, but with precision, and the audience had witnessed a masterclass in turning tension to triumph. Then, as the echoes of applause and whispered awe filled the space, the symbolic moment came. The cinematic mic drop beat. Crockett's words hung in the air, unassailable, undeniable, leaving the room and everyone watching with a stark awareness that the dynamic had changed forever. The hero had asserted her authority, and the villain's armor, polished and imposing for so long, now bore visible cracks. But the ripple effect outside that room would prove even bigger.
The moment Crockett delivered her mic drop line, the scene in the debate hall became instantaneous history, but the reverberations were only beginning. Outside the room, the world erupted. Phones buzzed relentlessly as clips of the confrontation circulated across social media. Hashtag Crockett wins, hashtag mic drop moment, and hashtag dignity over arrogance flooded timelines. On TikTok, creators remixed her poised comebacks into short, punchy videos that quickly went viral. Instagram stories flashed with screen captures of Miller's faltering expressions contrasted against Crockett's calm and commanding gaze. Within minutes, her words were everywhere, replayed, analyzed, and celebrated. News outlets scrambled to cover the story. Headlines highlighted the drama. Crockett stunned Stephen Miller in historic confrontation. Calm overcomes intimidation, Crockett's commanding moment. The mic drop that changed the debate. Journalists dissected every line, praising her composure, applauding her mastery of rhetoric, and noting the seismic shift in public perception. The narrative was clear. Crockett had not only countered Miller, she had exposed the vulnerabilities of intimidation and arrogance on a national stage. Celebrities and influencers weighed in, amplifying the moment. Tweets from high-profile figures praised her courage, while Instagram posts celebrated her eloquence and poise. Each endorsement magnified her impact, spreading the story far beyond political circles and into popular culture.
The audience, from students to activists to professionals, felt validated seeing her stand so firmly against a figure who had long represented fear and divisiveness. They shared, retweeted, and commented, creating a wave of admiration that was impossible to ignore. Even Miller's camp recognized the magnitude of the moment. Strategists huddled, attempting to craft statements, to redirect attention, to mitigate the damage. The careful narratives of control and dominance that had once surrounded him began to unravel under the weight of public scrutiny. Every misstep, every flaw highlighted by Crockett was now amplified and dissected by millions of eyes. The scramble for damage control underscored just how effective her performance had been, turning what might have been a fleeting debate victory into a lasting cultural moment. Constituents and communities that Crockett had long represented felt the ripple personally. Emails, phone calls, and social media messages poured into her offices, filled with gratitude, admiration, and excitement. People saw themselves reflected in her calm resilience, in her courage to confront authority without compromising her dignity. The sense of shared pride was electric, a reminder that strength could be measured not in volume or aggression, but in dignity, intelligence, and restraint.
In the quiet aftermath of the storm, the broader meaning of the confrontation became clear. Crockett's victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a lesson in dignity, courage, and service. The nation had witnessed that arrogance and intimidation, no matter how well rehearsed, could be met and overcome by calm, prepared, and principled leadership. It was a reminder that power need not be loud to be formidable, and that moral clarity could disarm even the most aggressive tactics. Her words, her composure, her unwavering focus reframed the debate entirely. She demonstrated that leadership was not about dominance or fear, but about service and responsibility. Every young person watching, especially those from marginalized communities, saw a reflection of possibility, that they could stand tall in the face of adversity, that their voices mattered, and that integrity and preparation could shift outcomes even in high-pressure situations. The ripple effect extended far beyond the debate hall. Students, activists, and first-time voters shared her story, posting about it, analyzing her strategy, and internalizing the example she had set. Crockett's victory became a blueprint for resilience. It proved that preparation and authenticity were more powerful than theatrics and aggression. Every careful pause, every factual rebuttal, every measured word had not only dismantled Miller's intimidation, it had inspired a wave of respect across the country. The debate had transformed into a cultural moment where dignity was celebrated over divisiveness and competence was recognized over bravado. Her approach underscored the value of standing firm in one's convictions while remaining empathetic and composed. She reminded the audience that leadership involves listening as much as speaking, understanding as much as asserting, and serving others as much as advancing one's own agenda. In reframing the encounter through these universal principles, she offered a moral compass for viewers disillusioned by cynicism, proving that courage and service could coexist with strategy and intellect. The impact was immediate and tangible. Young viewers felt emboldened, discussing her example in classrooms, on social media, and in their communities. They dissected the moments of composure, studied her delivery, and found in her success the affirmation that their own voices could matter. Parents shared her story with children, mentors highlighted it to students, and organizers used it to demonstrate the power of thoughtful, steadfast engagement. Beyond the personal and cultural resonance, the moment carried a profound political significance. It reminded leaders, pundits, and the electorate that accountability could not be sidestepped, that moral authority could be recognized instantly, and that the electorate was attuned to both substance and character. Crockett had shown that democracy itself thrived when its participants demanded integrity, courage, and respect in the public sphere. In the end, the confrontation was no longer just a clash between two figures. It was a microcosm of what society could aspire to become. It illustrated that one calm voice, armed with knowledge, preparation, and dignity, could shift the narrative, challenge entrenched power, and inspire a generation to believe in their ability to enact change. It was a testament to the enduring value of service, the quiet strength of composure, and the transformative potential of standing firm in truth. And that's how one calm voice changed the narrative.
Stephen Miller came into that room expecting to dominate, to intimidate, and to bend the narrative to his will. But Jasmine Crockett had already written a different script. Her calm demeanor, her poised responses, and her unwavering focus turned the crowd against him, leaving no doubt who truly commanded respect. The moment was not just a personal victory, it was a powerful demonstration that dignity, composure, and preparation outweigh arrogance and intimidation every time. As viewers, we are reminded that courage is not always loud, and strength is not measured by aggression. Crockett's performance showed that standing firm in your values, speaking truth with clarity, and maintaining integrity under pressure can shift the tide, even in the most hostile arenas. It was a lesson in resilience, a masterclass in poise, and a rallying call for anyone who has ever felt underestimated, silenced, or overlooked. Now, it's your turn to carry that momentum forward. Share this story with friends and family. Discuss it in your communities. Let it inspire action and reflection in your own life. Subscribe to this channel to witness more moments where courage confronts arrogance and where principles prevail over intimidation. Stand up for your values, speak your truth, and remember that dignity will always outlast bluster. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself, she showed the world that one calm voice can make history, that integrity can dismantle fear, and that every individual has the power to influence change. Let her example remind us all that our voices matter, and that courage grounded in principle can change the narrative for everyone who watches. The choice is ours, to remain silent in the face of intimidation, or to rise with conviction, clarity, and courage. The story is over in that debate hall, but the movement it inspires has only just begun.